In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to do a mini project where we create a collection of products. In this case, this is a bookshelf at a website with various books, all in different languages. And what we'll do is we'll create a menu here that will filter through those and show only the selected language. Now, this code right here is hard-coded HTML, and I think I even use something like jQuery for this menu. So what we're going to do is we're going to transport this over to a Svelte REPL, and instead of doing what this is, which is a table, we'll create little kind of product cards. And you can find a template for a product card over at W3 Schools, their how-to section. Just look at the profile card. There's also a product card here. So feel free to use whichever one you want. And the idea is each book will have a product card, it'll have an image, and it'll have a language attached to it with various links to download the product. But the same functionality is there. We'll go ahead and select an item. We can also enter in some search terms. And the various products show up. And once we empty it out, then all the products are showing. And so we'll go ahead and start at a semi-blank Svelte REPL. I went ahead and brought in the book data here, which is an array, and each book is represented by an object. And each object, at the very least, should have a title and should have a language property. As you can see, we've got more properties here, but really the filtering is going to focus on title and language. And the other thing I've already built out is the book component, which is quite a bit of HTML, but it's a presentational component. And feel free to make yours how you want and how to look the way you want. Otherwise, you can go over to the Svelte REPL and copy this code here, and feel free to use that. First things first, let's go ahead and bring in the book data. And so we've already done a named export. Let's go ahead and import it into app. And then we'll also go ahead and import the book component. And what we'll do is we'll set up an each loop here so we can see each of the books on the web page here. And so we at least have the outer template showing up. None of the details are showing up because each book is really a book object. What we'll do is we'll destructure this, and we've got a number of properties here: image, title, language, bundle. And so we'll replace book object with curly braces, and then all the keys that we want to use from each book object. Now, if you come over to the book component, you can see I've already exported all of these props. Put them inside of the book component, and you can see everything showing up. Now let's go ahead and add the select menu. Okay, so we have the basics of the menu. Let's go ahead and import this into the app component. Okay, so you can see we have the menu here, but there are no items yet. Let's go ahead and build that out. And the way we'll build all the languages into this menu is we'll pull them out of this data that we have here in the data array. So each of these books, as you can see, has a language property. And so we'll loop through this data, and we'll pull out all of the unique language names and then build this menu that way. So let's start off with an empty array. We'll call it languages. And we'll go ahead and make a little helper function here that will go get those languages. And what we're going to be focusing on in the book data is each book will be book object, and book object.language will bring back the value. So that'll bring back English or Khmer or Thai. So with that value, we want to see if this array has that value. And if it does not have that value, if it does not include that value, then go ahead and add that value. So if the language Thai comes in, it looks into here, it says, does it have Thai? If it doesn't have Thai, then it'll add Thai, as well as all of the previous languages that it's already contained. And then after it has grabbed all unique names of the languages, let's go ahead and sort it. Let's go ahead and call this and see what happens. And then we'll console log this. It came back with 17 unique languages. And you can see if we pull this one off, the sort, then we get all the languages, but they're not in alphabetical order. So we'll go ahead and sort them in alphabetical order. And that's how we'll build our select menu using our book data. Now we want this menu to be populated when the page loads. So let's go ahead and import Svelte's onMount lifecycle method, and so when the web page loads, when this component loads, then it'll automatically call get languages. Get languages will go through this data and build up this array. The next thing we need to do is get the languages to show up in the menu. So let's go over to the menu component. We'll make a variable called selected language. So we'll bind the value of the select menu to select lang. And what we need to do is export this. We'll export it up so app can see it. And then inside of our menu component, we need to bind to selected language. We also have to use the languages in this array inside menu. And the way we're going to do that is we'll also create a variable called letLanguages. And what we'll do is we know this is an array. So what we're going to do is we'll do an each loop. And so we want the language to render itself here as the text content. And then we'll also give a value attribute, which will also be language. And then inside of menu, we'll pass that as a prop. Good, so we got our languages showing up in our menu here. So now the last thing we want to do is just to make sure we're seeing the right value is let's reactively console log selected language. So if I select Dutch, then we see Dutch show up in the console. Okay, so those values are working. The next thing we need to do is we need to make a function that will filter out the books that match the language that we selected. I have book, but it's really book object. So each thing coming through is a book object. So return book object.language that is equal to the selected language. And then what we need to do is when we get these results, we need to store it in another array. So let's call this other array. And so filtered books starts as an empty array. But when we call this get books by language function, we'll return filtered books assigned to all the results of filtering through book data, which is our original data object. So the question is, when do we call this? We would call this once a language has been selected. Now, in vanilla JavaScript, I would probably come here and do an onChange event listener. But in this case, because we're using Svelte and because they have this reactive ability, all we have to do is make a reactive condition here that if selected language, remember selected language is the value of what we select here. If selected language is true, then just call this function. And so let's also set up a reactive console log so we can see what filtered books is and also what selected language is. So I'll select Farsi. Farsi comes back with 4 objects. Let's try Italian. So Italian comes back with 4 objects. Good. So the next thing we need to do is, now that we have some elements inside filtered books, is we need to get those to render on the DOM. So if we come down here to our main tag, where we've iterated over book data in order to show all the books, we need to go ahead and make a condition here. So if filtered books does have books in it, then go ahead and iterate over not book data, but filtered books. This is our new array. Else, go ahead and just iterate over our initial book data. Oh, and then we have to, what I didn't do was we have to close our if statement. So now if I do Farsi, then we just get the books for Farsi coming up. So now the one thing we haven't done is we have to be able to get all the books. Again, let's just say we need to have an extra option here that says show all languages. So if we come back to our menu, let's add another option here. And we'll give it the value of all. We'll remove selected and disabled. And here we'll say all languages. So good, we got that in there now, along with the languages. And so inside of our get books by language, we want to say if. And so why are we returning filtered books as an empty array? Is we're doing this because our logic down in our HTML is if filtered books doesn't have anything in it, then it'll jump to the else block. And so it'll just print out all the books. So now if we select Dutch, English, and then we do all languages. Yeah, looks like it's working fine. Okay, so that wraps up how to do the menu. So we select a language, it'll fetch those books that match that language, store them in this empty array, and then render those results on the page. If this array is empty, then it just defaults to rendering all of the books inside of our book data array. The next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and add a search input. So now I'm going to import the search input into app. And I'll put this in the same section tag here for query section. So we'll put it right under menu. I'll add this CSS for that section tag. So now if we come over to search, what we want to do is we want to create a variable. We'll call it search term. And as with all form elements, we want to bind its value attribute to a variable. And in our case, we're going to bind it to search term. So we'll export this. And then inside app, and so we also created a variable inside app, and we'll use the same name, search term, set it to an empty string, and inside of our search component here, we'll bind to search term. Back over in search, we'll do an on input event listener. We'll pass that up to app. So inside of search, we'll do on input, and we'll call an event handler called search books. So let's go ahead and quickly console log search term to see if that works. So if I type in, good, we're getting some feedback here, so that works. So now let's flesh out this search books. And we kind of want to do the same logic that we did with get books by language. We want to store our results in the same filtered books array. So why don't we just copy this here? And we want to return filtered books assigned to the book data that's filtered with each book object. And instead of the language, what we'll use is we'll search through the title property here in each book. We'll say if book object.title .includes, then return that. So also console log filtered books to see what happens. So as I'm typing, this function will get called on each keystroke, and it will go through the book data, and any book object title that includes what I'm typing in will get saved inside filtered books. So in the console log, well, you can see something came up here. In the console, we get 2 objects back, and the term I put in here matches this part of the word earth, and it matches this part of the word arte. So if I put a capital A, then I get different results. So let's go ahead and equalize that a little bit. So we want to say if book title lower includes search term to lowercase, then filter it. So now we should be able to type art again, and now we'll get not only the books that have the word art in it, but we'll get other books that have just a portion of the word. So we still get this one, and that's more or less what we want. And so now the last things we want to do is if I go ahead, I've got a search term in here. If I want to make a query for all the Dutch books, what happens is this is still populated with the past search query. So let's go ahead and handle that. And we'll do that here inside get books by lang. So the very first thing we'll do is we'll set search term to an empty string. So this just resets the search input if the select menu is being used. So if I type in a search query and then now I want to use this, if I do the language check, this empties out, results are coming down here. So now we want to do the same thing. Now if I type something here, I want the menu to go back to select a language. So inside of search books, we could say selected lang is equal to an empty string too. So I search for something here, then I select something, and then that clears out. Now if I search again, this goes back to select a language. Now one other way we could handle this is instead of putting this inside the function is because Svelte is reactive, we could say search term is true, then just make selected language be an empty string. So we could do this outside of this event handler as well. Let's see if we get the same result. So we'll select a language. Now we'll start typing something, and then this goes back. So both ways work. Then the last thing that we could do is in the search input, if we type something that doesn't exist, let's say let's try nonsense. And so right now when we type in nonsense, everything's coming back. So our filtered books array is empty, and because it's empty, then everything is showing up. So instead of that, let's go ahead and we'll put some more logic here. So above here, we'll say if search term is true and filtered books length is greater than or is equal to 0. So in other words, we've typed something to search, but nothing comes back. So filtered books is still empty. Instead of rendering everything, we'll render and then this last one the else block will just render everything. So now if I type in gibberish, Now we get no results coming back, which is our H3. Now we could also just quickly make a component. We'll call this a no results component. And I think W3 School even has here's something, notes. We can even just use one of these. Just copy the HTML and CSS from here. So I just copied it from there and I put it inside some section tags and added a little bit of CSS. So let's go ahead and import this into our app component. And instead of the H3, we'll show the no results component instead. So now if I type in gibberish, then we get this nicer looking component. Now the one last thing you'll notice here is that we have some transitions happening, and where that's happening is with book. So I just went ahead and imported a transition called scale from Svelte transition, as well as a Svelte easing function here. And then what I did was I attached it to the outer section tag, which is the book. So this outer section tag is the book itself. And that's why we've got some of these transitions happening. And that's how you can add filtered elements functionality to your product page using a select menu, as well as a search input using Svelte.